Good evening and welcome. Despite the progress made in talks between the US President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart President Xi in their first meeting in over a year, serious questions remain on whether Beijing can be trusted at a time when it's embarked on a path of global expansionism, where it is in conflict with nations around the world, not least of all India. From territorial salami slicing on the Himalayan frontier of territory, of land, to creating artificial islands in the South China Sea, to even fueling a serious drug use problem in the United States, Beijing remains a key challenge, which is why we thought we do this special show looking at the China challenge.
From not being on talking terms military to military, naval fleets moving in the Taiwan Straits, to candid one-on-one conversations. The optics of the much-anticipated XiBiden Meet in California were mixed. When the two leaders sat down for talks, Xi Jinping hailed the promising future of China-US bilateral ties.
It is an objective fact that China and the United States are different in history, culture, social system and development path. However, as long as we respect each other, coexist in peace and pursue win-win cooperation, we will be fully capable of rising above differences and find the right way for the two major countries to get along with each other. I firmly believe in a promising future of the bilateral relationship.
But President Biden was more stern in his messaging. This as the United States of America heads into presidential polls in 2024.
We haven't always agreed, which was not a surprise to anyone, but our meetings have always been candid, straightforward, and useful. I think it's paramount that you and I understand each other clearly, leader to leader, with no misconceptions or miscommunication. We have to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. And we also have to manage it responsibly, that competition. That's what the United States wants and what we intend to do. I also believe it's what the world wants for both of us. Candid exchange.
In terms of outcomes, from resumption of military to military communication to cooperating on the fentanyl issue and intergovernmental discussions on AI regulations, some headway was made. But outside the idyllic ambience of Woodside, where the two leaders met, their tone was ominously different.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is a guy who runs a country that is a communist country that's based on a form of government totally different than ours.
China never bets against the United States, never interferes with its internal affairs. China has no intention to challenge or replace the United States. Instead, we are glad to see a confident, open and prosperous United States. Likewise, the United States should not bet against China or interfere in China's internal affairs. It should instead welcome a peaceful, stable and prosperous China.
While fundamental differences were acknowledged, some even half-heartedly addressed, the jury is still out on whether President Biden has tamed the dragon, averting a second Cold War. With Shrishti Shankar, Bureau Report, NDTV.
So a glass half empty or one half full is a question many would be left with at the conclusion of talks between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping. That's their first meeting in more than a year. It comes at a time when relations between Beijing and Washington have been increasingly tense as China seeks to expand its economic and strategic muscle well beyond its shores. Look, he's a dictator. US President Joe Biden's description of China Xi, though he did add in the same breath, anyway, we made progress. The talks, though, are seen to have been positive and constructive, though the White House made it clear America wouldn't bend over its core concerns. Significantly, President Biden emphasized that the US and China were in competition. The US would continue to align with partners and allies around the world. That alignment clearly includes countries such as India, with whom the US has an incredibly close strategic relationship. At a time when China has been building military bases in the Indian Ocean region and holding military exercises with Pakistan. In fact, Beijing and Islamabad are in the midst of their largest ever naval exercises. These images show Chinese warships docked in Karachi earlier this week. Beijing is also selling military equipment to countries surrounding India, Bangladesh, Myanmar and Pakistan. But the larger message from the White House is clear. The world expects the United States to manage competition responsibly in order to prevent the relationship from veering into conflict, confrontation or a new Cold War. Any potential conflict in the Pacific region could be linked to China's tensions with Taiwan. China sees Taiwan as its territory as Taipei asserts its democratic rights. America is clear in this. The world has an interest in peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Another area of potential conflict, the South China Sea, where China has built artificial islands on reefs on territory it claims as its own, a fact disputed by many regional players. In its statement, the White House has emphasized its enduring commitment to freedom of navigation and overflight in the South China Sea, a position echoed by New Delhi. To ensure that militarily things don't get out of hand, there will now be a resumption of high-level military-to-military communication, which includes the resumption of telephone conversations between theater commanders. Significantly, there has been forward movement on combating illicit drug manufacturing at a time when the United States faces an epidemic of addiction and death linked to the growing availability of fentanyl, a potent synthetic opioid which US authorities believe may be coming from Chinese companies against whom criminal charges have been filed. Both sides will also discuss the risks of artificial intelligence. Vishnu Shom for NDTV. A US news portal, The Free Press, has drawn a link between the US tech entrepreneur Neville Roy Singham and pro-Palestine protests in America. An article on the US portal alleges that Neville Roy Singham, the affluent American-born tech entrepreneur, and his wife Jodie Evans have been major funders of the People's Forum since 2017. The portal alleges that the forum has co-organized multiple protests, including one in Times Square just a day after Hamas's surprise attack in Israel, in which 1,400 were killed. The portal goes on to allege that the protests are not an organic rage story. Remember, Neville Roy Singham has been accused of funding pro-Chinese propaganda in India via a website. He's recently been issued summons by the Enforcement Directorate. Can China be trusted? What do we make of the attempt by Joe Biden to meet Xi? Will that really break the ice? Joining us, Dr. Tara Karthap, Captain Alok Bansal, Major General Ashwani Sewach, and Dr. Brahma Chalani. Dr. Chalani, let me come to you first. There's a lot of hope on that Biden-Xi meeting. Do you believe that one needs to be essentially cautious given what China is up to in so many levels around the world?
Vishnu, the fact is that both China and the US today have certain weaknesses, which is why Biden extended an invitation to Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping decided to come to San Francisco for the meeting. China today is grappling with a worsening macroeconomic situation and falling investor confidence. Add to that high youth unemployment and an aging workforce. And the trend of a weakening economy comes with the fact that China is facing increasingly strong international headwinds. So by engaging with the US, Xi Jinping essentially is seeking to lure back foreign investment, or at least arrest the flight of foreign investment from China. At the same time, he has sought to burnish China's image as a world power on par with the US.
Okay.
Now, the US weakness is the fact that it's involved in two major wars, the war in Ukraine and Israel's war. And it wants to avert a third war, a war over Taiwan. So diplomacy for the US is important in that sense. But I think the fact that the US is deeply involved in two major wars and its military stocks are depleting makes it even more vulnerable to the specter of a third war.
Yeah. No, and that remains a huge concern now. But let me just go across to Captain Alok Bansal. And I thought what we do is go through a couple of key issues. These found mention in the White House statement and the talks between Xi and Biden, but these are important ones. So the question that I'll ask you now on your thoughts, is China using artificial intelligence to destabilize the global order? How would you look at that, Captain Bansal, as a potential tool being used by China at various levels?
See, firstly, we need to be very clear that as far as the field of artificial intelligence is concerned, China has made deep inroads. In fact, their progress has been phenomenal. They have, however, been affected by the recent technological sanctions imposed by the United States. And that's one of the issues why China was very keen for a meeting with the United States. As Mr. Chelani said, there were imperatives within both the countries why they wanted to actually patch up, because there was a section of the society which wanted them to do that, because there was a huge pressure from the business lobby in United States which had been trading with China that the sanctions on China need to be lifted. At the same time, as you brought out, Chinese economy has been slumping. There has been stagflation. It's an aging population, and for the foreseeable future, I think China will not regain that sort of economic growth, although the projections are fairly okay as far as the next year's economic growth is concerned. But there were compulsions why both the sides wanted to meet, and artificial intelligence is one issue where I think the Western world is equally concerned, because the progress that China has made, it can be used to disrupt major processes in other countries. And
Indeed.
I think a lot of countries have accused China of interfering in their internal affairs, elections, etc. And so probably I think this was one of the issues which could have an impact. And I think there have been some statements.
So let me just keep the ball rolling. Let me go across to General Siwach as well. General, the second key question, is China weaponizing drugs? And this is being a question being asked at so many levels. We have a drug concern in the northeast of the country. Secondly, the United States faces an epidemic of opiate use linked to fentanyl. So therefore, the question is China weaponizing drugs, since there are strong allegations that the Chinese companies might actually be behind a lot of this.
Yeah, very correct. Vishnu, there is no doubt China is totally involved in drug menace. In fact, not only in US, even in India, the complete northeast, the drugs are coming through Myanmar from China itself. And also the USA is a victim of this problem. And that is why very categorically Joe Biden has brought out this point to Xi Jinping that the drug menace can have a very serious implication for the future of both the countries. Whether China now mend its ways, time will only tell.
Sure.
Because you know what China says and what it does are two different things. You really can't rely on China in the type of promises which it gives. But certainly to me it looks like that the Xi Jinping is on a defensive, because the point is its own economy is not doing well. There is a problem in its domestic economy. The supply chains have shifted from China. There is a problem of semiconductor and the chips not being manufactured in China and it diverting to other countries, Taiwan, Indonesia, Vietnam, coming to India. So today the biggest problem China is facing, its economy is not up to the mark which they thought, and Xi Jinping is now becoming unpopular in his country only, and therefore there was a requirement of Xi Jinping to gain that by having some sort of military to military contact also was not there between China and US. I suppose therefore that Xi Jinping was very keen that he also meet Joe Biden.
All right,
and,
so perhaps China not negotiating from a position of somewhat weakness compared to what it was a few years back, linked to the economy. Third question, Dr. Chelani, it's a basic one. Is China's ambition towards Taiwan that of a colonist? Is that essentially what we're looking at? And is it your worry that when one talks about war, that this is something that may well be inevitable?
Vishnu, it's often said that the wars in Ukraine and Gaza have shaken the foundations of the international order. But think of a scenario where China takes over Taiwan. Such a takeover would not just shake the foundations of the international order, it'll usher in a new global order. That's why Taiwan is so critical. It's critical not just to Asian security, but to international security. And what we are seeing now, increasingly, is China putting Taiwan under coercion. There is an acceleration in the Chinese campaign of near daily military pressure against Taiwan. Large-scale war games are being held regularly. Regular aircraft intrusions into Taiwan's air defense zone. Warship deployments encircling Taiwan. Missile firings over Taiwan and drills simulating attacks on the island. All this is happening without the international community able to do anything. So once China's aggression against Taiwan begins, it'll begin in the fashion the way it took on India in 2020. Without direct combat, the Chinese forces, by stealth, encroached on key Indian borderlands. India was caught napping. And I think when the Chinese aggression against Taiwan begins, it won't be Russian-style full-force aggression. It will begin in stages. It'll begin with first using gray zone tactics, using civilian militias, then using the Coast Guard, then cutting off shipping lanes to Taiwan, cutting off internet cables of Taiwan, and then slowly accelerating. By the time the Americans realize that this is a war, it might be too late.
Sure.
So Taiwan, we should be clear on one thing. Taiwan is critical to international security. It's also critical to India's own defense. Because if Taiwan goes, the Chinese pressure on India will increase tremendously.
Sure.
And just the way today China is talking about reunification by absorbing Taiwan, its next territory, the territory it will covet next, will be Arunachal Pradesh in the name of reunification.
Yeah, that's a big worry for us. Dr. Tara Kartha joins us as well. Dr. Kartha, I've been asking some basic questions. One of the areas which China operates in, and we've not discussed this enough, is peddling influence at various levels and in various governments. So is, for example, and here's my question, the China propaganda peddler Neville Singham fueling anti-Israel, an anti-Israel stir in the United States, as has been reported? Do you believe, this is one example, but Chinese influence peddling, is that a geostrategic threat?
I think that is actually a very, very key problem for us in terms of China's propaganda activities, because they're increasingly, in fact, a couple of months back, we also saw it in Kashmir, but it's very, very, it's about 3 or 4 links away, but it is there. It's run from there. There are entities which are associated with it. Some of those entities are also linked to the Palestinian cause. So there's a kind of overlap in terms of these disinformation entities, that sort of thing. But in terms of propaganda, there is, I think, a huge amount of things which are going on, which are being overlooked by us as well here. And it's in the form of industry, in the form of people who want to go there and invest. I mean, just now, not propaganda. I'll tell you something else. In terms of you saw the Business Council meeting in Washington. You saw the enthusiasm there, right? You're talking of a bunch of people who want to get back into the Chinese market. No, that is not propaganda, but that is influence. That is what I mean by one level, there is the covert one, and the other one is it's a fact that everyone wants a slice of the Chinese market. So in the US, you had people like Kissinger, for example, who have been proponents of the whole the US-China Business Council. You can't say that's illegal, right? That is part of what they do, but they are hugely pro-China.
Sure.
And I don't think we have actually focused on who are those in this country.
No, you're quite right. It is, this pro-China element at so many levels. We need to look at that carefully. Captain Bansal, let me ask you another question. And as I do that, let's bring up an image of Hambantota port, with a Chinese warship, or in fact, a Chinese electronic reconnaissance ship, as it were, which docked there last year. This is for eavesdropping on us. Is China's debt trap diplomacy a tool of economic warfare? And I was referring to the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, where it appears that Sri Lanka is not in a position to pay. China is now looking after that from an economic standpoint, and they're deploying ships over there, including spy ships.
Sorry?
There is no doubt that China has tried this debt diplomacy as part of BRI. In fact, a large number of countries have been given debt at rates which have been higher than the prevailing rate, at least 2% above. And many of these countries had no wherewithal to pay back. Like in Hambantota's case, no proper study was done whether the port could generate any revenue. And consequently, we saw that the port was not in a position to sustain itself, and Sri Lankan government had to surrender the operations to China because the sovereign guarantees had been given. Similarly, we have seen Hambantota airport, which was built up, again has not been able to do because there is hardly any flight, there is hardly any traffic from that place. And consequently, we have seen not only in Sri Lanka, we saw it in other countries in Africa, where Chinese debt has actually put these governments under their virtual control because they have virtually brought these countries on the verge of default. And even when Sri Lanka defaulted, we saw the Chinese were the most reluctant to restructure their debt. So that's been a part of the diplomacy, because by doing that, they managed to get countries under their tentacles. But at the same time, there has also been reactions because the population has been reacting to it. This sort of an overt Chinese dominance is resented by the locals. We have seen it in Sri Lanka. People protested in Hambantota against the Chinese interference. We saw it in Africa. Many places, the people protested against Chinese investments. People protested against Chinese workers. And even in their friendliest country, Pakistan, today a Chinese citizen cannot move around without an armed escort because they have been targeted. And so these are the issues. While Chinese do think that they are trying to get the countries of the world which are part of the BRI under their stranglehold, economic stranglehold, sometimes it is backfiring.
No, it really is. In fact, I wanted to go across to General Sivach for more on that. Another aspect of what China is doing, and that concerns us. And let's just take a look at these images of cutaways of Chinese warships. And in fact, the Chinese warships in Karachi. Let's try and play out these images of the Chinese warships in Karachi. The point I'm making is that China is arming Pakistan with warships. They're exercising with Pakistan. They're supplying submarines. They have supplied submarines to Bangladesh. They are equipping Thailand as well as Myanmar with fighter aircraft. In a sense, they are encircling us with weapons that they are providing many of our partner nations. And that remains, an area where they are building up their influence and dependency.
Absolutely. See, so there's no doubt about it. As far as China is concerned, it is encircling India. If you see Myanmar, Uacapu port, as well as Coco Islands are totally under Chinese. Then Chittagong port in Bangladesh, then Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, and 2 islands in Maldives, they are also now developing for their own military use. Then Djibouti in East Africa, and then Gwadar. If you see this, that the complete encirclement is being done by China in a very systematic fashion.
Right.
And it is also ensuring that the relationship between China and Pakistan grow from strength to strength, especially from the naval point of view. If you see that the type of exercise with Chinese are now doing with the naval of Pakistan, that's a mind-boggling. They have given the best of their weapon system now to Pakistani. And this is a looming threat, and we have to understand it. The best of the submarines have been handed over by Chinese to Pakistanis. Also, they are trying to give a military support to Sri Lanka. And the spy ship which comes in Habantota, everyone knows what are these spy ships.
I know, and
these
we've
are
been tracking the movement of those ships as well. Those Chinese submarines yet to be deployed by Pakistan, but those are in order. 4 of them are meant to be built in China, in Pakistan, in fact, the other 4 in China. Look, I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. I'd just like to quickly move on as we, discuss this constant China threat to another story which is really critical. Rescue teams in Uttarkashi in Uttarakhand are battling against time to evacuate 40 construction workers who've been trapped under debris for over 120 hours following a tunnel collapse. The workers' prolonged confinement within the tunnel is raising serious concerns about their health and well-being.
130 hours and counting. But still no evacuation for the 40 workers trapped inside this Uttarakhand tunnel since Sunday morning. Rescue workers need to drill up to 60 meters to insert evacuation pipes that will create an escape passage for the stranded workers. Till a few hours ago, a little over half of this length had been drilled. So why is the process taking so long?
ये जो प्रक्रिया है इसमें ज़्यादा समय नहीं लगता है, लेकिन जो पूरा आपका पाइप है उसको जब हम लाते हैं मशीन के ऊपर बिठाते हैं उसको अलाइन करते हैं, क्योंकि पहले ऑलरेडी कुछ पाइप आगे जा चुके हैं, अलाइन करते हैं, फिर उसकी वेल्डिंग करते हैं. सबसे महत्वपूर्ण चीज़ है वेल्डिंग.
All this means a prolonged confinement for the 40 trapped workers that is likely to affect their mental and physical health adversely. Rescuers say the trapped workers are safe and are being provided oxygen, medicines, food and water like this through air compressed pipes.
कौन अंदर है जो अंदर फंसे हुए हैं?
हमारा बेटा है मंजीत.
करते क्या है वो?
वही काम कर दूरी दिन करता है अंदर, यही लोहा वाला काम इधर उधर हटाता है.
आपकी बातचीत हुई है और क्या बातचीत में कहा उन्होंने?
बातचीत में यही कहा कि पिताजी खटका मत करना, मैं यहाँ साथ हूँ और ठीक भी हूँ. तो हमने इधर से बोला कि हिम्मत बेटे बढ़ाए रखना.
While there is hope the evacuation may begin soon, the workers are likely to need comprehensive rehabilitation once they are safely rescued. With Kishore Rawat in Uttarakhand, Bureau Report, NDTV.
Well, it is now a matter of time, and there is a real sense of hope that these workers will be pulled out, but it is taking a lot of time getting through the debris, proving to be very difficult. Indeed, we'll be tracking that story very closely. For now, this short break.